Hello, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral and to the reflection for today, Friday the 5th, I think it is, of March. And I'm Robert Titley, the Cathedral's Canon Treasurer. Last Sunday at Evensong, my colleague Nigel Davies, our vicar of the Close, in his sermon was talking about the passage that we'd heard from a New Testament book called the Letter to the Hebrews. And he was talking about a phrase in that reading which says this: faith is the conviction of things unseen. The conviction of things unseen. And in the funny way that the human mind does sometimes, it put me in mind of something apparently not connected with that at all. One of the wonders of the city of my birth. I'm referring to the London sewers. Underneath that enormous city is a subterranean city of majestic vaults and tunnels, much of it built by the Victorians, and as was the way with the Victorians, much of it hugely over-engineered at the time. Tunnels and waterways that were bigger and chunkier than they needed to be at that time. And it's a good job they over-engineered them, because since those sewers were built, the City of London has expanded and its consumption has expanded enormously. So, good job that they were over-engineered, but now even that hugely, in one sense, extravagant system is now being put under strain. A couple of weeks before Nigel's sermon, I'd seen a report on the BBC website. Well, it said this: a disgusting fatberg with the same weight as a small bungalow has been cleared from an East London sewer. Thames Water engineers said it took weeks of brute force to unclog the foul-smelling mess of fat, grease, and what they describe as unflushable items from a sewage path in Canary Wharf. That's the part of the financial district of London. If they'd not done it, the report said, sewage could have spilled into the homes of Londoners. Complex societies like ours assume that certain things that are unseen will just be looked after, that there will be water from the tap for your coffee in the morning, that there will be electricity to heat the water that you need to make it, and afterwards there will be drainage to carry away the waste. We simply trust that these things are there, and it's why during these weeks of lockdown we have here in the cathedral given thanks for our health and care workers, but also for the many other essential workers that just keep society moving. We don't know what they do half the time, nor do we know sometimes how close we might come to disaster, as was the case in that East London sewer. We live each day by what the letter to the Hebrews calls the conviction of things not seen. Except that we're so used to it, it's less a conviction than an assumption. If you go for a walk, if you've not done so already today, you might do that this evening. And if you're in any sort of built-up area, just notice all the metal plates in the pavement beneath you. Gas, telephone, cable, electricity, water. And marvel at all the unseen systems which keep us going. Systems, of course, that are made with human hands, but which are a kind of crude shadow of all the systems that whir away in each living body and in each piece of physical matter. Nigel talks about this in his sermon, the way the writer of the letter to the Hebrews writes words that foreshadow what will be discovered about the microscopic and indeed the subatomic life of our universe. The writer says at one point, the worlds were prepared so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. Now, losing faith in those invisible systems is a serious matter. I am rather scared of heights. I'm not sure what goes on in my head, but it feels to me as though I lose confidence in those unseen systems of balance and coordination which function pretty well when I'm at ground level or close to it, as I am now. And societies can break down when confidence in the system drains away. In 2008, Canary Wharf, the scene of the Fatberg, was the scene of a near disaster of a different kind. Back in 2008 and the financial crisis, we discovered how the complex world of money revolves around two words that are derived from the vocabulary of faith: credit and trust. And our world came close to meltdown when confidence collapsed in those things. And that's part of the spectre that's haunted us in the pandemic. Not just the virus itself, but the possibility that what the virus is doing to us may lead people to lose trust in the systems which support life. We see, for instance, what we're calling vaccine hesitancy. People who are really not keen, perhaps completely unwilling to receive vaccination because in some cases they've trusted what they've read in their social media rather than what they can find in what we might call the systems of public truth. Now, this is all very interesting, but the writer to the Hebrews is not speculating in a rather abstract, Brian Coxey sort of way about how the world works. The writer is concerned with God and with faith in God. But what is faith? Consider two phrases which, if you may not have heard word for word, you may have heard something rather similar. Someone saying to you, to a person in a time of trouble, well, you have your faith to comfort you. Or someone talking about how they're no longer a believer. They might say, I lost my faith when I left school. Now, these phrases seem to suggest that faith is a possession, a thing. Increasingly, in a secular society, a very strange, a very exotic, perhaps an unimaginable thing. But some people have this thing called faith and others don't. That seems to be the assumption. And for those who don't have it but might like it, that really is exasperating. Why is it that others have found this thing that sounds so palpable and definite, like a coin in your pocket, when they haven't? Well, as I look at my life of faith, as my faith and trust in God has ebbed and flowed, it feels less like a thing and more like an attitude to reality. And here's the point: it's not a bizarre and unimaginable attitude. It's an attitude that most of us already have in relation to levels of reality that we can't see but which we take on trust. The difference is that faith in God is an attitude towards reality at its deepest level. This is not my idea. If I try and trace it back, I think it goes back to a sermon I heard back in the 1980s when I was training for ordination. It was a talk, really, given by a man who was then, and is now even more, an eminent scholar. He's a Roman Catholic scholar of the history of the church. His name is Eamon Duffy. And in what was a very personal talk, he talked about how, as a young and rather confident and brash believer, something happened in his life which led to him coming to the conclusion that faith no longer added up. And then as the talk unfolded, he talked about how he had found his way by a rather winding path back to Christian faith. There was, he says, no miraculous conviction. He confessed that he now had fewer certainties than he'd had as that brash young man. But he then ended his sermon by saying this: the difference between a believer and a non-believer is not that the believer has one more item in his mind that the non-believer doesn't have. It is that the believer is convinced that reality is to be trusted, that in spite of appearances, the world is very good. And he ends by saying that reality is inescapably personal, and it is most luminously itself in the life and death of Jesus. Thank you for this time that we have spent together. Thank you for entrusting those minutes to me and to others you may watch on our Cathedral Reflections. And I hope that the God at the depth of all of our being is a presence that you know with you and in your hearts now and in the days to come. Thank you and goodbye.